Women in British colonial India and Spanish colonial Mexico were incredible workers. Women provided for their families, raised their children, entertained their husbands, and obeyed the cultural laws imposed upon them. This we know not from personal accounts, but rather from accounts written on their behalf by their husbands, fathers, male government officials, or by male scholars. Women were systematically denied the privilege to learn to read and write by men, so every anecdote we have today comes from the viewpoint of a man. With no true first-hand accounts, teasing apart the truth from what was written becomes more difficult. This is troubling for us because at the time, scholars from Britain and America observed the local populations in both India and Mexico under an austere scientific lens. More specifically, scholars were trying to classify and to document the different types of people that resided in their colonies. These photographers, who were almost always male and white, did not appear to give much thought or care to the actual day-to-day reality of colonized people's lives. They coerced the lives of locals to fit within the frame of their camera, often distorting reality in pursuit of a better photo.
These photos served the photographers' purposes, to define, to order. But what were the women they photographed really like? Who were they once they stepped away from the lens? What work had the photographer interrupted? These questions are largely unanswered, at least by the women themselves, and the labor of these women has been historically unwritten and devalued. But in this episode of Edges of Empire, we will highlight some of these lost and misinterpreted voices.
Effort has been made in the past to give back colonized women their voice, though writing generally about a large demographic proves problematic. Karen Helen Halverson wrote in her master's thesis at the University of Oslo in 2008, "The studies of colonial social reforms have attempted to provide the otherwise mute voices of Indian women from the colonial period history with a voice. However, the studies largely categorize the female voices as either supporting the patriarchal structures that were keeping them subordinated or as voices of resistance. This dichotomy ignores the possibilities of individual female voice and the possibility that a historical subject may balance different loyalties simultaneously." In colonial India, women were usually made to stand in front of painted backdrops, holding props and dressed in costume, in order to provide photographic definition for the new caste label. One key component of colonialism was the systematic ordering of the colonized peoples. These labels were then used by the British Empire to categorize and systematically oppress the indigenous population. Britain perpetuated and enforced the caste system as a way to control Indian people and exploit them economically by forcing them into specific roles of limited privilege and limited opportunity. The order greatly benefited those of the upper echelons of society, but not so much the lower castes.
In Mexico, photographs such as this one featured the common activity of grinding maize. Women occupied a crucial sphere of the economy, agriculture. They tilled the land, which was back-breaking work, and nurtured the crops throughout the growing season. Women also spent a great deal of time shucking corn, making tortillas, and grinding maize. This was of great importance because the Mexican diet at that time was based almost solely around these crops. Women made sure their families were fed and provided for through their work, though not many would picture a woman when they think of a farmer.
Many historical documents call attention to the fact that Mexicans during the 19th and 20th centuries were uneducated, poor, and often unhealthy. Writers of the time sought to place the blame on the Mexicans themselves. They could better themselves if they only tried. But the system itself and the perpetuation of negative stereotypes inhibited the Mexican people from changing their situation. Women labored to provide for themselves and their families, all while foreign photographers captured their likeness without documenting intent. The photographs were often used as evidence of the Mexican people's lack of hygiene, material goods, wealth, and education. This rhetoric was often used to promote the United States and Spain's before them perceived superiority over the Mexican people. These particular photographs feature Mexican women washing laundry in the river, an activity that would have been perceived as uncivilized by Americans and Europeans with access to more modern, industrial laundry methods.
Other photos, like this one of young Mexican women, girls even, taking a break from working in the fields, have been used to perpetuate the stereotype of laziness amongst the Mexican people. It simultaneously serves as evidence of the view many American and European men had of Mexican women as exotic and sensual beings. This photo is likely posed and features one woman stretched languidly on the logs as nearby women are carrying baskets to and from the field in the background. This invasion of woman's bodily autonomy, her far relaxed pose, and the focus on her starkly white dress, in comparison to the other women's normal clothing, is common throughout photographs of colonial Mexico and India. While these women toiled for hours, their photos were widely circulated as postcards and other forms of visual media.
In India, the caste system as defined by the British Empire determined not only Indians' places in the social and gender hierarchy, but the economic hierarchy as well. Women of certain castes were only permitted to perform specific types of labor within their caste. Photographs by British photographer William Johnson serve to further establish the caste divisions. The women pictured here are labeled by the photographer as Bundari fruit sellers. These women work to provide for their families and supplement their husbands' incomes. The photographer posed these women with their wares in order to provide photographic examples of castes to assist the British Empire in furthering their domination over the Indian people via ordering. These women were likely not informed of how their photos would be used by the British. That information was withheld from them, and any royalties from their likenesses would have gone to the photographer.
In historiography, there is a new developing movement to take back the voices of women and research the thistles of treasure of history regarding lives of women and the roles they played, which have so far been ignored. Gender has always been used as a trope to produce narratives of nations, usually without consent. This new movement calls for a more inclusive national historical narratives where gender, race, and colonial relations are given their dues, and not one biased form of narrative is used to shape the history of a whole gender in regards to a specific race to benefit another. Our backs tell stories no books have the spine to carry.